Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight. This is how we take back our country.
Right.
This is what the Founding Fathers did. This is what we were so responsible to do. And then the reason we are in this position now is because we failed to, we've been paying our taxes, we've been voting, and I say this to people all the time. Would you hire an employee and not oversee their work? Of course not. Would you hire an employee and give them your checkbook and not oversee their work? Of course not. We find ourselves in this situation because how do these people get rich in politics? There's a lot of people that figured out there's a lot of money to be made, okay? And that's what it's all about. It's really all about the money. Even the formation of government itself is for what? To protect your ability to acquire property, protect your property, and to do commerce, and to live in a society where everyone can prosper. But that requires everyone's participation. Okay, we can't be absent in this, and that's what's happened to us. So let's turn the ship around. Let me give you the money right up front. This is required of all your school boards. Write this down. Okay, this is the statutory. We have a copy circulating. Were we able to get a copy of what you brought us? Did someone start that process?
Who brought it?
I did.
There's a copy of a school board oath, and it is pursuant to what is being said here. So let me read it. Every town officer, and that's all of them, okay, that if they're elected, they shall subscribe an oath or declaration as prescribed by Part 2, Article 84 of the Constitution of New Hampshire. There's one for the legislature and the executive, and then there's one for the local level. This is the one for the local level, okay? So what's important in this is I want to point out a couple things. First of all, the state constitution is a trust indenture. Anyone know what a trust is, right? A trustee, a beneficiary of a trust, basic trust law applies here. That's what we're dealing with. So the trust indenture is the state constitution. And we are the beneficiary of the trust. We created the trust, our founding fathers did, and the trustees are your public servants. And that's who they are. They represent you. We're going to go through that list. Next slide, please. Okay. This is how you remove them. Manner of dismissal. Now, the manner of dismissing a town officer who violates their oath set forth in the preceding statute shall be by a petition of the Superior Court for the county in which the town is located. I'm going to show you a second option, which includes involving your sheriff and getting people arrested who violate their oath. Because every time they use the illusion of the sanction of their office to convince you that they had any authority to do what they're doing, they violated their oath. And the best part is we're going to show you how this Department of Education, Frank Edelblut's attorney, sent a memo to all the school boards. He has no enforcement power. He's not delegated that power by the legislature. So he's limited in what he can do. So what did he do? The same thing we've been hearing. He issued some guidance. Been hearing that word a lot, haven't we? He issued some guidance, and he told the schools, he said, hey folks, you can't make mask policy and you can't make a vaccine policy because that power lies with the legislative body, not your local school board. So the recurring theme is always going to be about you and your consent. Next slide. Okay, Declaration of Independence. I wanted to start here because something very profoundly is said as a foundation. By the way, do you know New Hampshire signed its own Declaration of Independence and created its own on June 15th? Yes. Most of the states had written their own version of a declaration because they sent all their delegates to Philadelphia to sign the famous document. They all had their own individual spin. So that document that we celebrate every summer is all about the collective thought process of all those who assembled to represent the will of each state. But it really, I'll start from the beginning, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And here's the money, that among these are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. As I said, this is going to be a recurring theme. What I really want to emphasize is that New Hampshire's Constitution, the first thing is Part 1, the Bill of Rights. Okay? What does this say? To secure these rights, governments are instituted. That's exactly what they did here in New Hampshire. Part 2, the form of government, was to protect Part 1. And I point this out because the Federal Bill of Rights, they lied to you in school. I'm sorry, they lied to me too. The Federal Bill of Rights was not written for you. Your state constitution was. Where do you think those rights were written down prior to? We're going to cover that next. But your rights begin first with God, or nature's God if you're not a believer, and that they belong to you. Okay? Government doesn't give you your rights, but the ones that are written down, are the duty of the trustees to uphold. They swear an oath. That's why the oath is so important here. They swear that oath to uphold the provisions of the trust. And there's another legal concept called the law of the land, which many scholars will tell you is also called due process of law. Okay? So every public official who is elected swears an oath because each of the positive rights of your state constitution, there are 38 in the beginning. We're going to cover the 38th. There's 39 that are enumerated now, plus a few A's and B's. And there's a lot more rights than that if you read the totality of the amount of rights. I don't want to overwhelm you. Just know that there are 39 articles, and within each of those articles, in most instances, are multiple rights. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, James Madison, Federalist Papers. Everyone's heard of Madison, right? Got news for you. He wasn't the father of the Constitution. Okay? They lied to you in school again. All right? He actually advocated the Virginia plan, a parliamentary monarchy form of government. He thought that he was smarter than the Englishmen that preceded him, and that somehow he would recreate the same type of government they had in England, that we would simply do a better job here, and they didn't. One of my favorite passages from studying the ratification debates is Mr. Patterson from New Jersey, representing as a delegate of New Jersey. He objected. They kept trying to insert the supremacy clause. At every turn, they were trying to make this new corporation created to do the business of the states to have supreme power over the states. And Mr. Patterson rose in opposition. He said, "Dear sir, you're asking me to commit treason against the commission that brings me here. My commission did not authorize me to surrender the sovereignty of the state of New Jersey." Okay? So Madison does, in fact, though, write a lot of brilliant things. And so this is one of them. He does a full comedic circle. Through the process, he becomes a convert of a constitutional republic and not a parliamentary type government. But this is it here, and this is very profound. In a word, as a man is said to have a right to his property, he may be equally said to have a property in his rights. Quote, he has a property very near and dear to him in the safety and liberty of his person. Government is instituted to protect property of every sort. There are multiple elements. It's not just real estate. Like he just said, your rights are your property, and so on and so forth.
Whatever you create.
I'm sorry?
Whatever you create.
Exactly. Whatever you create is your own. Exactly. And then it goes on to expound. Government is instituted to protect property of every sort, as well as that which lies in the various rights of individuals, as that which the term particularly expresses. This being the end of government, that alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is his own. Okay? That goes back to the Declaration of Independence, doesn't it? Because it's doing what? The governments are instituted to protect your property. Next slide, please. Okay. Before we get into the state constitution, this is what we didn't do. This was the original last article. So after the founding fathers gave you 37, not gave you anything, let me rephrase that. When they wrote down 37 specific enumerated rights that the government had a duty to protect, they said, you're going to protect yourself. You're going to oversee. So let's talk about this. Social virtues inculcated. A frequent recurrence. Recurrence is what? Return and review. Return and review. The fundamental principles of the Constitution. And a constant adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, frugality, and all social virtues are indispensably necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and good government. Imagine that. The people ought, therefore, to have a particular regard in those principles in their choice of their officers and representatives. Well, wouldn't that solve a lot of problems? Right? But we don't do that. We look at them in a two-party platform. I got news for you, the two-party platform isn't constitutional. George Washington said it would be the death of this republic if we went down that road. Your two-party system is a creature of the legislature. Your legislature now makes its own rules as to how it re-elects itself. Okay, it's frightening. And it's only the only way we're going to turn this around is for these numbers and this awareness to continue to grow. I digress back to this. And they have a right, and here's really not only the right but the duty. And they have a right to require of their lawgivers and magistrates an exact and constant observance of them. An exact and constant observance of them in the formation and the execution of the laws necessary for the good administration of government. You people all here are the sovereign. You make the law. The law of the land is the state constitution. We're going to give you that next slide, please. Okay, this is the introduction in 1783. This is how the preamble originally reads, okay? A constitution. Remember I said that the Bill of Rights comes first? Very plain here. A constitution containing a Bill of Rights and a form of government to protect those rights. Agreed upon by the delegates of who? The people of the state of New Hampshire. Now, in January 5th, 1776, the political class made up of the provincial Congress, the province of New Hampshire and all those people who were living here under English rule. That's who they're referring to. That's who those people were at that time. Because they had done what? They rolled a cannon up in front of Governor Wentworth's house and said, screw. So they got rid of him and they were left with no functioning government. There was no way to adjudicate commercial disputes, resolve any criminal matters, and had no legislature to make or enforce any types of laws or rules or regulations so that they could be civil amongst themselves. And of course they were preparing for the invasion. To continue, in convention held in Concord the first Tuesday of June 1783. There were multiple conventions, folks. From 1776 through the Revolutionary period, they kept assembling like we're doing here. They kept discussing what are the laws that we collectively all will agree to. Because collectively, we, the people, have to agree to these are the rules we want to have to give to those public officials. Because it all comes from you. And that's really, I'm going to repeat that theme over and over again. And then approved of who? By the people of said state. Established by their delegates. So again, the state was the makeup of those people who signed a temporary document on January 5th. It was a temporary document. They said so because they had hoped that they could in fact reconcile with the king. It was their last-ditch effort to go down that road. Next. Halloween, by the way, October 31st. Okay. Part 1, Bill of Rights. Article 1. All men are born equally free and independent. Therefore, quote, all government of right originates, there's the word again, the people, right? Is founded in consent and is instituted for the general good. Number 2, all men have certain natural and essential and inherent rights, among which are the enjoying and defending of life and liberty, and watch this, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property. Much stronger than the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence did not go into this detail, and the Declaration of Independence is a foundational document, but it wasn't legally binding. It wasn't served, it was a divorce letter, right? It was sent to the king and said, hey, we're done with you. This is our divorce, we want nothing to do with you. But it wasn't binding on anyone, because it took what? Force of arms to free ourselves from that letter, right? We told them to get lost, and we still had to use force to get the job done. But, and again, in a word, seeking and obtaining happiness. And you tie that right back to the reason I started with James Madison's definition of property. Again, go back to your rights, the importance of that. Next slide, please. Among the natural rights, some are in their very nature unalienable, because no equivalent can be given or received for them. Of this kind are the rights of conscience. How about mask? How about in needles, experimental treatments? Okay? You as a God-fearing person, you have that right. You know, one of the things that I object to, besides it being experimental, is the aborted fetal lines that are in these experimental treatments.
Yeah.
Okay, so all those, and even if you're not of belief, okay, even if you believe in nature as your God, you still have this right to choose your free will. And that's what this is referring to. Next slide. And it goes on to expound in great detail here. Remember, the people of New Hampshire that founded this Constitution were all practicing Protestants. What did that mean? That meant that they didn't, when they assembled, and I'm going to cover this in the power of the legislature, when they assembled, they did not need to immediately assemble to make all kinds of laws and say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Why? Because that was already thousands of years old. Remember, these people already had 700 years of common law. For those who've not heard me before, there's a wonderful teacher who's been here before in New Hampshire named Chris Ann Hall. She teaches the genealogy of the Constitution. She teaches that you must know the 5 founding documents, the 1100 Charter of Liberties, 1215 Magna Carta, 1628 the Petition of Right, 1648 the Grand Remonstrance, and then finally the Petition of Right. And all of these things lead to the English Bill of Rights and a king losing his head. That's the way things went. And so if you don't know, see, the Bill of Rights and all the rights that you've been taught in school are all evolution of this. They're all evolution of the understanding of what the English common law was all about. And so having said that, they had this moral code. And I would submit to you too that this is another problem with our schools. They kicked God out of the schools and the devil moved in. Listen, I'm not here to advocate that the school, and there's separation. The next article, which I'm not going to get into, deals with separation of church and state in a brilliant manner. But I'll make this very basic point. If your kids are being subject to other children in these public schools who have no moral compass, they are impressionable. It causes you all types of stress and conflict. Okay? It's your duty to protect your own kids from this. But we've all been indoctrinated. Listen, I refused to participate. I hated school. I really did. I didn't comply. I fought them they kept me back in the 8th grade. Teacher told my mother, he's smart, he just won't cooperate. I wouldn't cooperate. I hated the institution. So, to continue. Every individual has a natural and inalienable right to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience and reason. No subject shall be hurt, molested, or restrained in his person, liberty, or estate for worshiping God in the manner and season most agreeable to the dictates of what? His own conscience, or of his religious profession, sentiments, or persuasion, provided that he doeth not disturb the public peace and disturbing others in their religious worship. In other words, you're free to be yourself, but you can't force your agenda on someone else. You're free to be you right up until the time you cross that line and you interrupt. And this is what is generally referred to as the common good, right? The public peace. And that's where the line is drawn for that purpose, because you're required to, as a good person and with good moral compass, whether it's based on a religious belief or not, you have to respect that. Next slide, please. State sovereignty, you've heard a lot about that when the governor said these contracts do not apply, that we do this all the time. He was lying through his teeth. That law is 94 years old, goes back to 1933. I'll cover that later, okay? Every time he signs money or takes money, and he surrenders the sovereignty of the state, because each of those grants, every time you take federal money, you are obligated to the terms and conditions of the contract. It is a contract. It's not free money. And more to the point, you want to blame someone for the price of gasoline and the price of food and everything you're buying every day going through the roof? Blame your local elected officials. I'm a Republican. I'm ticked. Okay? These clowns are clueless. Half the state budget was predicated on federal money. These people go to Concord. They deal legislatively with the federal, with the state income tax, federal budget, state budget, all state issues, They run out the clock from January to June, and when they go out of session, what do? They say, bye-bye legislature, now we're going to spend federal money without your consent. Okay, they're taking out loans in your name, and they take the money out of your check every week. Okay, it needs to stop, because it's a crime. Let's continue. Oh, I'm sorry, go back. Hit the back key, there you go. All right, the people, back to, remember this is a recurring theme. Who? Us, the people. The people of the state have the sole and exclusive right of governing themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state, and do, and forever hereafter, shall exercise and enjoy every power, and every jurisdiction, and every right pertaining thereto, which is not, or may not hereafter be by them expressly delegated to the United States of America in Congress assembled. I want to explain this. This is 1783 when this is written. In 1781, we had what was a confederation of the colonies who were newly formed states called the Articles of Confederation. Okay? And so because of that, we were in a compact with the other states. So the Continental Congress was not still created officially, but it was what they agreed to live under. And so that's why they're referring to. But this really goes to a heart of something else. Everything that you don't write down in the state constitution is retained to all of you. If you didn't give it away, they can't exercise. That's what your school boards are doing now. We didn't give them any of this authority that they're using against us, okay? But they're taking it, and they're getting away with it because you didn't know how to stand and say, no, we will not comply. To continue. All power residing originally in and being derived from, who? The people. All the magistrates, it's all executives and all the judges, and all officers of government are their substitutes and agents at all times. When? Sometimes? Maybe? Emergency? No. Did it say any exemption? No. All times. Very clear. Okay? Next. U.S. Constitution makes the point. If this was changed by the adoption of the U.S. Constitution 5 years later, this wouldn't exist. It's called the 10th Amendment. And the 9th Amendment basically says, just because we didn't write it down doesn't mean that we gave you any more power. And then they come and follow up with the 10th Amendment that says, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to who? The states or to the people, reaffirming the principle. Now I'm going to show you the Supreme Court of the United States upholds this very principle in a completely unrelated case, but it deals with state sovereignty. Next. This is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. This case had to deal with nuclear power. Nuclear power, they had dirty radioactive fuel, what to do with our dirty fuel. And it got into a state sovereignty issue. And so in that case, as with all case law, is a lot of good stuff. So let me read it to you. It is in this sense that the 10th Amendment that I just shared with you states but a truism that all is retained which has not been surrendered. As Justice Story put it, quote, this amendment is a mere affirmation of what upon any just reasoning is a necessary rule of interpreting the Constitution. Now he's referring to the U.S., but it still applies. Being an instrument of limited enumerated powers, it follows irresistibly that what is not conferred is withheld. In other words, if you didn't give it away, it's still yours, right? How is someone just going to take something that you didn't give up? No, it's not how this works. So, conferred, withheld, belongs to this, and belongs to, I'm going to start over again. Being an instrument of limited enumerated powers, it follows irresistibly that what is not conferred is withheld and belongs to the state authorities. This has been the court's consistent understanding. The states unquestionably do not retain the states unquestionably do retain a significant measure of sovereign authority. All that which we didn't give to the federal government. Remember, federal government can summarize in 4 things. Wage war on behalf of the states united, negotiate peace, after protecting, what were they doing? They were protecting the shipping lanes, right? They were protecting the states from being, so that they could send goods to and fro. That's why we created a navy, for that very reason, okay? And so on the cessation of conflict, they would negotiate on behalf so that all the states in the Union would have the same representation, so that a southern state wouldn't have any different treatment than a northern state or an unfair advantage. And that gets into also treaties, and we'll cover this. Treaties, and then, of course, regulating interstate commerce. Next, I'm sorry, significant, we're done. Next slide. Okay, this is the most important thing you'll ever read. This is your protection contract. Anyone tell you you have a protection contract? It's what your taxes pay for. In the current version, it says, this is the original text. If you look at newhampshire.gov today, it will say taxation and protection are reciprocal. In other words, what did I say? It's a trust indenture. You pay money, taxes, and in exchange, you swear an oath, if you move here, to do what? To live under this social compact called the Constitution of New Hampshire, and in exchange, you'll live under the laws, but in exchange also, the government will abide by these same contract. Okay? Very important. So let me read it. Every member of the community has a right to be protected by it. It is the Constitution, of course. In the enjoyment of, remember we went over the rights? The enjoyment of his life, liberty, and property. He's therefore bound to contribute his share in the expense of such protection. You notice it says his fair share? Who decides that? No. It is delegated to the legislature to spread the tax equally. When you read what they did, the way they taxed animals and property, they really did spread the tax base. Today we're lied to and told the New Hampshire advantage is we have no income tax and no sales tax. Those are all lies. I'll prove it to you. You want to? Let me show you where your income tax is. It's called your federal income tax, because half of your state budget is predicated on federal money. So don't give them that BS that there's no income tax. They've just taken it from you in another way. And those of you who own homes, I don't need to convince you, do I? They stick it to you, register your car, look at the difference in registration fees versus other states. And then they say there's no sales tax. That's a lie too. Why is that a lie? It's called inflation. They keep printing money. Your state government keeps taking money from the federal government. They've been doing it for 94 years. Every governor and every executive council since 1933 has been taking federal money and doling it out to their friends and getting kickbacks. Let's continue. No, I'm sorry, go back to 12. And this is the other part of your obligation. So you contribute, you pay taxes, and to yield his personal service when necessary or an equivalent. Remember I talked about obligations? It's not just that you have rights, but you also have obligations. So this really encompasses three things. Militia duty if called, right? The founding generation, they were all required to have what? Adequate provisions of gunpowder, lead, a musket nearby, and a knife to fight with if necessary. Why? Because we didn't have police. Okay? We took care of ourselves, and that's the way it's supposed to be. All litigation involving law enforcement, I'm a big pro-law enforcement guy, but all litigation on law enforcement, failure to protect, goes nowhere. Supreme Court has routinely, even if a crime is committed in front of a police officer and he fails to save you, you still can't sue him. Why? Because he has no duty to by any law. Okay? So it's a big deal. But to continue, the other thing is jury duty. Grand jury, petit jury. Okay? We think of the petit jury the most, but guess what? Both of those juries are not instruments of formal government. They originate in the Bill of Rights of both the state and federal constitutions. And you wouldn't know that today, would you? The courts have taken your juries from you, control of your juries. We should be able to assemble what they used to do in the days of old under the original statutory language is your town clerk, when they knew that a court would assemble for criminal hearings, would call and let the town clerk know that they needed to select a grand jury of citizens that were qualified voters to assemble for a secret grand jury proceeding, because you couldn't proceed without it. okay? And that did what? That allowed us to investigate corrupt public officials. And many others, including our judges that they have tried to make themselves untouchable. So, to continue, but no part, and this is really, really the most important part in my estimation, but no part of a man's property, remember what I started with Madison, right? Definition of property? But no part of a man's property shall be taken from him or applied to public uses. You're in the private. You're a private person, okay? You're free to come and go under the state sovereignty clause, right? And you only have limited government that you've assigned by this written contract, okay? So when they take something from you and try to, in other words, take some of your freedom, right? And use it for the public good. Who was it you that was saying, someone was saying earlier, you were, that your public official, please tell the audience what your public official said to you about what his belief of why he has a job in the first place.
In writing.
In writing?
In writing. He gave it to me in writing. The duty of the government is to do the most good for the most amount of people.
And who decides that?
I asked him that.
Right. Exactly. That's the conversation we had. And many of these people believe that. They think as soon as you elect them and go to Concord, that they can do whatever they want. This might as well be worth to wipe your butt with, because that's exactly what they think of it. Really. They're ignorant of the instrument, and they don't care, especially if they're on the left side of the political spectrum. They think as soon as they win, they're off to the races, and they're going to push their agenda down your throat. And it's coming, folks. And the crisis in front of us really, really makes my point for me. I really don't have to beat that too hard. Okay, next. No part of a man's property should be taken from him or applied to public uses without his own consent or that of the representative body of who?
The people.
Did it say the legislature there? No, it didn't, did it? Many have read this instrument and said, when I first read this, I thought legislature too. No. This throughout. See, there are 10 places in the Bill of Rights where the people are explained. It's you, it's me. Okay, it's the body politic. All of us in the community are the people. What they're referring to is the amendment process. Remember I said the people created the government? Only the people can give or grow the size of government. Let me give you a great historical example. In the year 1850, the state legislature saw fit, said, hey, we should expand the power of New Hampshire's government for 12 different reasons. I'm going to focus on 5. The first one was we're going to get rid of the executive council. Number 2, we're going to create a lieutenant governor. Number 3, we're going to create a department of railroad. Number 4, we're going to create a department of agriculture. Number 5, we're going to create a department of education. Superintendent. You know what the people said? No. You'll find that if you study this, you'll find that from 1783 to the 20th century, the lawyers and the bankers and those who had their eyes set on controlling you for profit always failed. The necessity to put a 2/3 consent of the people to approve the growth of government was always an impediment. So my investigation is I've turned over how did they actually do what the Constitution says they cannot do. And they only got away with it because we were unaware. We were unaware of what our rights were. We weren't supervising them. And it's a generational problem. I think it was Jefferson who said, you know, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time. And it had to do with apathy, because this is a recurring, and it has throughout history. To continue. The last one is one of my favorites. Nor are the inhabitants of this state. Inhabitants, by the way, are those people who not live here. The Constitution defines inhabitants as those who have political rights. Political rights is anyone who's entitled to vote, or someone who can elect or be elected into office. Not a resident. Okay, I'm not going to go down the road of voting, but that's a big problem. That's who an inhabitant is. That's someone who's qualified by the Constitution to vote. nor the inhabitants of the state controllable by any other laws than those which they or their representative body, again, it doesn't say the people, but that's what it's referring to, representative have given their consent. When did we give any more power to the legislature? We didn't. Or to the school board, or anybody else. Okay, so this is a recurring theme. You need to wrap your heads around this. That again, government of the state can only grow through the 2/3 majority amendment process. Next slide, please. Article 15 is a very lengthy article. It deals with your rights if you are charged with a crime. But it goes further than that. The last section, and as you're starting to see through these articles I go through, many of them have multiple rights in them. And this one is no different. But I focused on the part that's relative here. No subject shall be arrested. Subject means...
Interesting word.
It is subject. Why? Because under Article 3, which I didn't cover, is that you agree to live under these rules. And if a man, this is why the affidavit, we were talking about the state police arrest at the executive council, right? Has to be by affidavit. Okay, he has to swear and testify in front of the judge that he witnessed someone doing what? Being unruly. Okay, and so that's why, from what I'm told, none of them wanted to sign the affidavits. So the arrest did happen, but none of the state troopers are willing. Maybe we're going to see some change, some backyard maneuvering, but right now, as far as I can tell, there is no affidavit to do that. But they have to do that because you are now subject to the law. You're subject to the law. Why? Because you agreed. This is why your consent to this form of government is so important. Because if you don't, it becomes tyranny. And so these limited construct of a limited government is always through your consent. No subject shall be arrested, imprisoned, despoiled, or deprived of his property, immunities, or privileges, put out of the protection of the law. What is the protection of the law? All these articles. Every one of these 101 articles of the state constitution are called at the end the laws of the land. Laws of the land mean due process of law. That means every public official who swears an oath to protect your rights must do so because you are entitled to it. You're entitled because you're the beneficiary of the trust. He's sworn an oath to uphold the provision of the trust. So he had a duty to... So when these public officials say, I can do what I want, no, you can't. You're bound by this instrument. And shame on you, a local rep here, and I'll call him out, Jess Edwards, okay? He banned me from Facebook the other day. Why? Because I called him out. I said, look, it's a shame that you're ignorant of your responsibilities. You want to keep banging the GOP drum and be blind to what this governor's doing, and you want to give me a lecture about you're better than the Democrats? No, you're no better. You're no better. Why am I suing the Democrat? Why am I suing Chuck Morse and Sherman Packard in the Supreme Court right now? They've taken away your fundamental right to redress your grievances before the legislature. They've taken from us our right to deliberate, speak, and debate in front of the legislature. Okay, by the way, that's exactly what should have been allowed when the executive council went and took the power from when the legislature gave its power to that group of men, the Joint Fiscal Committee, the executive council, and the governor. No, that violates separation of powers. They can't give their powers away. That's why I'm going to such great lengths to setting the foundation for you to understand that unless you consented to this type of additional power, it's null and void. So, to continue, protection of the law, exiled or deprived of his life, liberty, or state, but by the judgment of his peers. That is a very deep subject. It covers the legislature, and I'm going to cover its power in a minute, the jury system, grand jury, and petit jury. So, also, because the legislature is to judge for the benefit and welfare of the people, what should be inscribed on their heart and controlling their conscience is there. See, you should be able to be of either political persuasion and have your personal beliefs, but you're bound by the rule of law. And this is the rule of law, and they don't know it. It's the problem. So, anyway, that's what it means, and of course, the law of the land I already explained. Next slide, please. Okay, the state of New Hampshire is not a home rule state. The Constitution delegates that only the general court may suspend the laws of the state. No one else can. Right now, we have public health laws on the books, and your school boards are choosing to ignore your rights to due process. Okay, we'll cover that in a minute. But that's what's going on. Only the legislature has the ability to suspend law. That, by the way, that's in the Bill of Rights. Okay, that protects you that so no other branch of government can suspend the law that the legislature has created. Because the hope was that you would have an educated legislature that would stay in line and live within the terms of our contract. Next. I'm sorry, don't go. It's a mental thought for me to keep reading. And power to make laws, the authority lies within Part 2, Form of Government, Article 5, and may only be exercised by them and no other. This is what Article 29 says, suspension of the laws by the legislature only. The power of suspending the laws, or the execution of them, ought never to be exercised but by the legislature. Anyone else to say there? No, is it? Very, very clear. Only the legislature. And then, or by the authority derived therefrom, that would be you, to be exercised in such particular cases only as the legislature shall expressly provide for. So again, your school board can't say, hey, we don't care that the public health law that says that all they can do is quarantine you. Okay, that's all they can do. That's all Sununu could have done during the emergency crisis. I'm going to show that to you in a minute. Next slide. This is the power that the founding fathers gave away to make rules, regulations, statutes, codes, and laws. Okay? The power to make laws, elect officers, define their powers, duties, impose fines and taxes, and assess taxes. Now, that goes to also your school board. It's done by the legislature. Because we're a smaller state, everything is done from Concord down. So that the legislature, made up of 424 members, right? You have your House of Representatives with 400, and you have 24 senators. And only through that process can they do the following. And Father, full power and authority are hereby given and granted to said general court. You notice it said from time to time. Remember I said they didn't write this thing and start writing laws. They didn't need them. They had the English common law, they had their 10 commandments, they had their scriptures. Okay? They didn't need to do this on the spot because it wasn't necessary. It was limited government. Our Constitution only has 11 job assignments when you break down the three branches, the judicial and your town and your county offices. Okay, that's all they got. But to continue, are hereby given and granted to said general court from time to time to make, ordain, and establish all manner of wholesome and reasonable orders, laws, statutes, ordinances, directions, and instructions, either with penalties or without, so as the same be not repugnant or contrary to the Constitution. Folks, if your legislative body doesn't know what the document says, how do they know what's repugnant or contrary? That's supposed to be the limit of their power. That's what they refuse to respect, and that's why you cannot elect these people and not oversee them. Because it's your job to say, no, I refuse, I will not comply. These are my rights, and you will comply. That's how you can enforce the provisions we began with when I laid out for you, how do you remove your school board? Give them a written affidavit, and we've got a copy, I've got a template here, we'll share with everyone. I drafted it so that what you do is you give them written notice and say, really simple, you violated your oath, and you need to leave. You're done. It's all done.
If we get enough people doing that.
Right. Well, and what I want to do is involve the sheriff's office, and I did invite one, and I'm not going to name his name at this point, but I did invite a deputy because this needs to happen, and this education that I'm giving to you, I'll give to them and say, look, it's time to knock it off, okay? If you are a constitutional agent, you are sworn an oath to uphold the law. I know they didn't teach you in the academy, but I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you because if you don't step up, the people are going to pick up their rifles. Okay, that's where this is all going. And it's a horrific thing to even contemplate. Anyone who's seen combat, violence and that kind of stuff is ugly. Okay, I don't wish it upon anyone. The point is that bad things are going to happen if the government doesn't finally acquiesce and start listening to the people. But it takes us to be aware, and it takes us for our numbers to continue to grow. And folks, I'm going to tell you right now, they're not letting off the accelerator. So be aware, we have to be more diligent than ever. Turn off the TV. Tell your friends, no, I'm not watching the NFL. I'll be polite, I'm in a church. Knock it off, okay? Knock it off, because
God's heard it before.
God's heard it before is right. Especially if he was at Scott McKay's event last night.
Right. Dan, I have a quick question, and I just want to
Yeah.
clarify this to see what direction we go. Act of 1871.
Yeah, don't go down that road,
Okay.
because it deviates into another conversation that's not relative to the school board right now.
Okay. so
And there's a simple explanation for that. A lot is made of that. And I don't want to go there right now, but please hold your questions until I'm done.
Okay, sorry, Dan.
That's okay. So to continue, it says that they'll do these things, make laws, statutes, ordinances, directions, either with penalties or without, so as the same not be repugnant or contrary to this Constitution, as they may judge for the benefit and welfare of the state. As they may judge for the benefit and welfare of the state. Who? The general court. Why do you think it was called the general court? I would submit to you that part of my lawsuit is that I submitted this to the court, evidence of nearly 200 years of we the people submitting our redress of grievances to the legislature. See, there wasn't a two-party system in the beginning. They legislated based on your issues, right? Instead of having fundraisers to promote more of their own nonsense, they should be assembling with you, finding out what is at your heart, what is your concerns. But they're not, are they? No, they don't care. They don't, listen, talk to any of these clowns and these diehard, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good Republicans out there, and I've always been a Republican, I'll never vote Democrat. But the point is, many of them are as dumb as a box of rocks. Really. It's sad. It's sad. They're arrogant, they're not educated, and I just want to punch them.
Hey, you
But
did
how
it.
many
You did
educated
it.
people do we have that would
Not
are
enough.
willing to step up?
Not enough, and that's why I took this course in my life to try to, if I could affect my culture by doing this, this is why I do this, because God gave me the ability to see this and to articulate it, and that's I think becoming my ministry. I didn't set out to do this. I'd rather be doing a whole lot of other things, but that's not.
Watching football.
Right now, I won't watch football anymore anyway. But
They
to
go for the flag anyway, so.
there you go. So to continue, I want to cover this though, as far as they may judge for the benefit and welfare of the state. Has your school board done that? This power is to the legislature. Yeah, they didn't do that, did they? And did they give that power to the school board there?
No.
No, it's reserved to and that's what Frank Edelblut's lawyer told the school boards. Sent out the memo. Holly, do you have the memo?
When did this go out?
On the table out
June
here.
7th.
Oh, God.
June 7th, this memo, black and white here, but this memo was sent out by Christopher Bond, the lawyer for the Department of Education. And he told all the schools, because all he was authorized to do was give guidance. That's all he could do. He has no enforcement mechanism, but he gave them good legal advice. He said, hey, the legislature has already established public health policy. You can't suspend that law and make up your own. See, they're following Sununu's lead. Sununu did the same thing during the crisis, and we'll get to that in a minute. But to get back to closing this out, for judging for the benefit and welfare of the state, and for what? For governing and ordering thereof. Who? The state employees, not you. Most of these statutes and codes are supposed to be written for them to control the public servants. Because they can't make anything that is what? Repugnant or contrary. Remember, I took the time to explain to you that only when you, the people, want more government, I'll give you an example of common law statute versus a colorable statute that's corporate in nature. The 10 Commandments were in existence at the time, so the crime of murder or theft was thousands of years went into the understanding of that those are bad things. A proper statute under common law would have been, I'm not talking about English common law, I'm talking about New Hampshire common law in 1783. Because of this contract meant that statutes, because of this, could be written to identify the difference between manslaughter, second degree, first degree murder, capital murder, and blah, blah, blah. Same with theft, petty theft, grand theft, and so on. These would all be proper applications. I gave a speech to the Merrimack County Republican Committee 4 or 5 months ago, Holly.
In the winter.
And I said to the audience, I says, I propose that any proposed legislation from this point forward, that every piece of legislation you folks want to pass, you must first cite your authority from the state constitution that allows you to pass this legislation or even consider it. I got a standing ovation. I didn't have the heart to break it to them that it already said that. It says, so the same shall not be repugnant or contrary to this constitution. It's already there. But it goes further than that. And so from there, and for the necessary support and defense of the government thereof, to name and settle biannually or by fixed laws for naming and settling all civil officers within the state. Your local school board, your towns, okay? That's why the legislature, that's why we're not a home rule state. Very important. So that they do this, and that all civil officers within the states and such officers accepted that are at the higher level, like military is what they're alluding to. And because, again, when this was written, we were a sovereign country with our own militia and our own military, okay? And so did every other state. They were all united together. So from there, you have this portion, but it's going to repeat that phrase again. All civil officers within the state, such officers accepted, the election and appointment of whom are hereafter in this form of government otherwise provided for. What have I been telling you? If you, the people, didn't say, yes, I want more government, what's it saying there? If it's not in the Constitution, do you realize you have 250 agencies under the governor's office right now, under the executive branch, all funded by federal money over the last 94 years? Department of Education, the CDC, and all DHHS, DMV, all of them. They're not in the Constitution of New Hampshire. Remember I told you there was a problem? There was a problem that called the state constitution. They couldn't get you to go along unless they committed fraud, unless they tricked you and went around, and they did it on an apathetic society who they stopped teaching civics to.
Yes.
Yeah.
They gave you social studies, CRT, and all this other nonsense. Listen, our kids do not need to learn what to think. They need critical thinking skills, number one, but secondarily, they need to know the law of the land.
Yes.
Those who have read Ayn Rand, I know that Karen Testerman isn't here tonight, but I gave her this lead. I found a teaching constitution in 1903, and the author of the document was John Galt. Right? Ayn Rand says in Atlas Shrugged, who was John Galt?
Yeah.
Over and over again. Well, a man named John Galt gave the warning. He said, look, this is a problem, that apathy is a regular issue. And that at the end of his preface, he said, it is the duty of our students today to learn our Constitution so that tomorrow they may be good administrators of it. And what did they do? They took it away. Why do you think our legislature is so ignorant? And most of them are really, even the Democrats, as crazy as they are, most of them are genuine, sincere people. They believe that BS. They really do. Right? It's not, they have the full conviction that the right has, the right side of the aisle, because their belief in a two-party system and not the rule of law. All right. So, to name and settle biannually or provide by fixed laws for naming and settling all civil officers within the state, such officers accepted, the election and appointment of whom are hereafter in this form of government otherwise provided for. And to set forth the several duties, powers, and limits of the several civil and military officers of the state, and the forms of such oaths or affirmation as shall be respectively administered unto them for the execution of their several offices and places. What's it say? And so the same shall not be repugnant or contrary to this Constitution. Meaning that they can't even make unconstitutional agencies, but they have. Okay? All right, next slide. Okay. I'm not going to read this whole section, but I only want to focus on the very top, okay? This infectious disease has been with the people of New Hampshire long before New Hampshire was settled by the Europeans, okay? They would get here and they would bring with them their diseases. In 1784 was distemper. And it only provided that the governor was capable of proroguing, which is a fancy old word for temporarily suspending the legislature and moving it someplace else if there was an outbreak of distemper, okay? So that was the only power he was delegated to do that. It evolved into a public health policy. At one point, we had a vaccine schedule that was authorized by the legislature for smallpox. It did happen, but it was the will of the legislature. And during that period in time in history, they thought that was the appropriate means. Today we have so much more information about the dangers of what they're doing to us. That was never part of the equation when that legislation, just like the case Jacobson versus Massachusetts, that most of you probably have heard, that Alan Dershowitz cites when he was on Fox and other media, where he says the state can force vaccinate you. He's citing this Massachusetts case in 1905 where a man refused to accept his jab. They fined him $5. He lost his case, but he was completely incompetent. Number one, he argued that the Declaration of Independence was his source of authority. It wasn't. Okay? He failed to provide a good defense. All the evidence, he didn't understand the rules of evidence. Everything he tried to argue in his own defense was not admissible. And so he lost. And so that established the precedent. But I disagree with that precedent for the following reasons. I just showed it to you. I just showed it to you that the state can't just make things up. If we, the people, don't give them the authority, they can't make it up, and it needs to stop. And it only does so when we, the people, are aware. And so, what does it mean? This is due process of law. This is all that was possible during the crisis, and it's all that's possible today and pertains to the school districts and public health policy. Any person subject to an order for submission of a specimen or examination, immunization, treatment, isolation, quarantine, provision of information, inspection of a building or conveyance, or any other order of the commissioner under this chapter. By the way, this is infectious disease. That's the subchapter here, okay? It's what they're dealing, this is the current statutory, this is the current laws on the books dealing with infectious disease. And it goes on to say, or any other order of the commissioner under this chapter, or RSA 21P53. 21P53 is Sununu should hang for this crime. Okay? I'll say it as loud as I can anywhere I can. He should hang for what he did. Let me tell you why. You know what 21P53 says? It's called, get this, ready? Public Health Emergency Management Powers. It says that if the governor declares a state of emergency because of an outbreak of infectious disease, this applies. This applies. So what does this apply? What does it say? May request a hearing. So if you are served an order, you may request a hearing in the Superior Court to contest such an order. The commissioner shall provide or cause to be provided to the person both oral or written notice of a right to contest the order and form for making a request, which form shall require no more than the person's name, address, and signature, and the time and date of the signature. And here's the catch. The submission of the completed form to law enforcement officer or other individual serving the order shall be considered filing with the Superior Court. The reason they did that is they didn't want infected people running around. They said, hey, if we think that there's enough probable cause, okay, that you should be quarantined, and you don't agree, let's say you have the common cold, and you disagree, I don't have COVID, right? I disagree. Flip it over, sign it, and date it. You got to stay home, but they got to get you to what? A courtroom in 48 hours. And they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. See, your rights were still protected under this public health policy. And it evolved over 240 years. But these clowns are just suspending your laws, making up new ones as we go along. How'd they get away with it? Got away with it because we didn't know.
Well, and they shut down the courts too.
That too.
They shut down the courts.
That too. Next slide, please.
For months, for a long time.
Rights of assembly and instruction. The people have a right in an orderly and peaceful manner. By the way, when it says orderly and peaceful manner, it didn't mean you had to be polite.
Or quiet.
It just meant you couldn't shoot them. Things were raucous, you know. Being polite in this dialogue we talk about today. One of my brothers in the Patriot movement is a very vocal individual. Okay, he's caused a lot of stink because he throws a fit. You guys have not seen Frank in motion. He throws a fit. And let me tell you something. You know when this crisis ends? When everybody in this room and everyone in this state is as pissed as he is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? But that's what it meant.
They don't scare us yet.
Right. And when he says, we know where you live, it has a specific meaning because he's been doing it for 18 months. He's going to show up with a bullhorn in front of your house. It's not going to cause you harm. It's going to make you uncomfortable. Okay? So there's a lot more room about peaceful dissent. Remember, they tarred and feathered people. Okay? They did some pretty outrageous things that we would... Stockades. There are a lot of things that make us uncomfortable today because we're so much more civilized than we were then, but still. So don't let that slow you down. So anyway, the people have a right in an orderly and peaceful manner to assemble and consult upon the common good. That's what they were doing at the Executive Council. Why? Because the Executive Council meeting was doing the work of the legislature, which they had no authority to do in the first place. And I love this one. To give instructions to their representatives. They're binding. So when you give them an affidavit and you notice them, it is binding. You just have to take the next step and process it through the court. And so most people are not prepared to either financially hire a lawyer or have my skill set to be able to bring it to the court and say, make them perform. Okay? But that is the remedy that is provided by law. Hold that thought, please. Next slide, please. Okay. They're already trying. 1980, they took away one of the mechanisms by which every 7 years, the founders said, you'll submit something to have the convention, a question of calling a convention to be submitted to the people after 7 years. Delegates to be elected in the same manner as representatives. In other words, to amend the Constitution. If the people want to change their form of government, then every 7 years, they should make that provision available. Not just the legislature when it feels like it, but they repealed it. Next. We're almost done. Okay, this is the current mechanism. Okay, this is the current mechanism. 2/3 of majority. The only way state government, if they want A, B, or C, I don't care what it is that you want. Listen, if you think something as stupid as making heroin legal is a great idea, convince 2/3 of your neighbors. You're not going to win. That's not going to happen, but that's the way our system works. Okay? That's the only way state government grows. Next.
That's it.
Okay. Questions? You had a question.
You're right, my question was around the assembly.
Yep.
So I've heard that assembly doesn't really mean, it's a much more powerful word than what people presume. They think protest, they think showing up, that we can create new delegates. Is there any truth to
No,
that?
you can't create new delegates under the existing system. Now, can you
Like our
exercise
representative.
Article 10 and reform your government? Yes, and there's a process that it's another class to get into as to how that's done. It goes back to Magna Carta. What did Magna Carta do? And this is something I said earlier to those before we started. Pull all your kids out of school. Take them all home, right? And say, guess what? We're done. This is games all done, right? And when you clowns figure out what you're going to do, call us and maybe we'll consider coming back. But under the current, your laws are no good. We're not paying our taxes. You can all go screw. Because that's exactly what Article 61 of Magna Carta did. Magna Carta was one of the first written forms of a written form of government. The year 1215. The king was out of control, right? They drafted the 1100 Charter of Liberties that didn't fix anything. The king acted like a king, out of control, and finally they snatched him, put a sword to his throat and said, Sign this or else. We'll cut your head off right here. And he did. Now, that, I wouldn't call that a binding contract, but but they made the point, and under Magna Carta set forth the principle that no one is above the law. No king, no executive, no one is above the law. Everyone is held accountable to the law, okay? And so, what do they mean? So they provided, chapter 61 provided the means of redress of grievance. It's the first beginning of redress of grievance, which they said, if the king violates the terms of Magna Carta, the men of the round table, 25 noblemen, will serve him written notice that he has violated Magna Carta. If he didn't remedy the violation in 40 days, we're all done. We withdraw our alliance, we withdraw our allegiance, we won't pay your taxes, and if necessary, we'll attack you militarily. And that's why I said, the power of the purse. Remember, the power that oppresses you is bankrupt at every level. The federal government is bankrupt. Your parties are bankrupt. All they do is keep printing money. Okay? They're setting you all up for a global collapse, for a global reset. I'm convinced that this whole COVID thing was all about one thing. They didn't know Donald Trump was coming. They planned this with Hillary Clinton in office. Okay? Because why does this wonderful silver dollar that I carry around as a prop all the time, it's a 1923 peace dollar. Why does it take 25 or 26 Federal Reserve notes to buy this 1 ounce of silver? The Constitution still says this is lawful money. How'd they do an end run? Well, I found the end run, which is in 1933. They went ahead and created a criminal enterprise. They did. FDR with the bailout. They're going to get a bailout, aren't they? Remember that commercial that used to play all the time? It was a kind of a comedy loop that ran on some of this. They're making fun of these European countries with the European bailout, right? They're going to get a bailout, aren't they? And so he was just talking about how this BS of just printing money and bailing this and bailing that, it's all just shuffling the cards, right? Trying to hit a reset in all these countries that keep going down this road. And this is nothing new. This has been going on for a long time. This is why Christ turned the tables on the money changers in the temple, okay? And so this process put in motion. So in 1933, FDR seized all the gold with the New Deal.
Yes.
And what did he do? He set up the means. Do you know that loans are being taken out in your name? That right now, all this federal money, you're all responsible for it. They take it out of your paycheck every week. Why? Where was that authority? They took the power of the legislature to make law and to pass taxes. So they assemble from January to June. They do the state's business based on state revenue. When they get done, they send them home. Then a couple of special people, Joint Fiscal Committee, the Executive Council and Governor, they take money in your name, okay? They pledge your faith and credit. How about that? It's been going on for 94 years. They pledge your faith and credit and binds you to money. And here's the worst part. Nancy Pelosi and company get to decide how that money gets sent back to the states. Then they send it to the states without the consent of the oversight of your legislative body, and they spend it, and they keep spending it. And there appears to be no end in sight until now. Until now, they finally went too far. Now, in my estimation, they have finally shown their true colors, and that's why I wanted to make this presentation to you tonight. We have a copy of the, do you have the oath, Holly, or the contract?
Yeah.
This is an affidavit. Now, for those of you who don't know an affidavit, there's been a lot of internet conversation about a gentleman in another part of the country who's been teaching people how to fill out affidavits. An affidavit is a written legal statement that says that everything you put on this piece of paper are true and correct under the pains and penalties of perjury, okay? But it's not an immediate cure. It's a notice. Qualified immunity for public officials requires they to do what? Know that they violated your rights. You must first instruct them that they are in fact violating your rights. Then, if you sue them, they can't claim, Your Honor, I didn't know. I didn't know I was please, I promise I won't do it again. Come on, how many times have you heard that happen? Right? They're all untouchable at some point. Why Hillary Clinton and Clapper and Comey are not in prison is all the proof I need, right? So I drafted this document, and it goes over, I can share this with you afterwards, but I go over what your rights are, and tell me this doesn't apply with your school boards. I'm going to read the first section. I, a citizen of the state of New Hampshire, a beneficiary of the trust, hereby give notice of trespass on my constitutional rights protected by the Constitution of New Hampshire, a trust indenture. By the exercise of this school board, trustees, of undelegated powers is criminal fraud. In the New Hampshire statutes 641:14, unlawful simulation of the legal process. Unlawful, here's the definition. A person is guilty of a misdemeanor who, with the purpose to procure the compliance of another, with a request made by such a person. Again, the school board has no authority. It's simply a request, isn't it? But they're using their letterhead. They're using the power of their office to induce the belief that they have the authority to do what they're doing. They don't. But no one has stood up to them at this time. So it goes on to say, to procure the compliance of another with a request made by such person, knowingly sends, mails, or delivers to such a person a notice or other writing which has no judicial or other sanction, but which in its format or appearance simulates a summons, complaint, court order, or process, including but not limited to lien, indictment, warrant, injunction, writ, notice, pleading, subpoena, order, or insignia, seal, or printed form of federal, state, or local government, or an instrumentality thereof. And again, he repeats it. Or is otherwise calculated to induce the belief that it does have the judicial or other official sanction. What are they doing? School boards. They tell you what? That under some provision of their rules, that the school nurse gets to now set public health policy? No. She can't do that. She can't do that.
They are in the school building.
Right. You gotta wear a mask. Hold on, who gave you that right? You don't have that. You work for me. And then they do what? Sit the cops on you. Why? Because the cops are no more educated than anyone else. This is a big, big problem. And again, most police officers don't want to be in that position, okay? But the sad reality is that they're there because it's affected them no less than it's affected all of us. Okay, so they're not the bad guys in this for the most part. Most of them want to do a good job, okay? Like everything else in life, we have bad apples, so I'm not going to defend bad actions by bad faith actors. Those state troopers should not have done what they did. Nuremberg trial was full of that. We're just following orders. No, because guess what they did? They swore an oath too. Swore an oath. Questions?
I'm just curious what part of the letter, I've been actually trying to use this letter against my school board.
Yep.
I came down here from Alton to
Yep.
listen to you.
Yep.
And well, this is actually specifying against masking, against, more or less.
Edelblut's letter, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So this is more or less saying that if we're talking about vaccinated children and we're talking about unvaccinated
Right.
children, that they can't discriminate
Right, it's all or nothing.
against them.
The
So
port-
how does this,
I'm referring to the section of the letter where he tells them that the legislature has reserved unto itself the ability to establish public health policy. See, there's no delegated power. If no one granted your school board to establish public health policy or a mask policy, they can't just make it up.
But they
But as a society, we have been tolerating this for so long that the establishment thinks that it's just normal business.
oh, I understand that. I've been very,
Don't they
my fair
think that
share
our
of
school board, they
confrontations.
think that,
I guess I'm not sure,
All the letter does, for your benefit, is it establishes that they were made aware.
I have served them all with this letter.
Okay.
I've also shown.
What'd they say?
They got very uncomfortable, that I had access to this. I had about 60 people in my high school, when we were talking. I had to be settled down a little bit from the officers, but they, It's really funny, actually. The last high school meeting they have, so Barnstead and Alton share a high school. And the last high school meeting we had, they actually had, they were talking about all 3 schools. And they were discussing that the high school, which is completely optional for masks, has less COVID cases than than Barnstead Elementary School or Alton Central School. And as they're reading this sort of stuff off, and I just said, excuse me, Superintendent, did you just tell everybody in the room exactly, like, so the school that is optional
Right.
has a third less cases than these other 2 schools, which masks have been forced on my kids.
Right.
And they just.
Common sense is not working at all.
It's not working.
And here's the problem. Here's the problem is that you're negotiating with people who need to be terminated.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
Right, so I'm saying, done with that. We're no longer here to negotiate with you. You have a choice. You can either resign and maybe someday run again, because if I have to go to court and file a petition with the court and you're removed from office, you'll never serve again. You'll never serve again in public office because now you've been convicted of breach of public trust.
May I?
Yes,
All right, so on that very topic, in the Exeter decision
yes.
was sort of addressed these arguments, and the judge threw it out. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the sheriff is, if you have no enforcement,
Yeah.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Please review the Exeter decision because I didn't read it and I don't know anything about it.
okay, so, to my knowledge, so I'm not involved in the case.
Yeah.
But the 141C, the purview of school boards to be able, they didn't relate. They basically said that just because you have the health department is controlled by 141C doesn't mean necessarily that the school boards have to run masking through them, that they can work within their need to provide safe learning environments.
Did they argue that the masking was a impediment or a cruel and unusual punishment?
Nope, they didn't rule on that at all.
What did they argue?
The argument was with respect to, Stephanie, help me out, the
Restraint?
restraint. And they said it wasn't restraint because it wasn't manually. They were using the mass version of the law, just like they did in Merrimack.
Again, if you don't understand the rules of evidence, okay?
I get it, right. But
Right.
these are decisions that are being made by judges, and I think the judge is backed into a corner and just saying, screw it, take it to another level. We don't
No,
have
I'm
anyone
gonna give you a
enforcing.
different take on it.
Okay.
The rules of evidence in any legal proceeding must be understood by someone bringing a legal action. I have found a repetitive pattern of abuse. It's no different than professional wrestling. There's a trial that goes on. The outcome is already predetermined, and the legal team is going to give the illusion of giving a good defense. But in the end, they actually make a bad case. I'll give you the example, the David Binford case. That was the case that allowed us to be terrorized by the governor for 18 months with the emergency powers. Let me explain how that worked. They go to trial. Daniel Will, who's now a judge, who shouldn't be a judge, is the president of the Bar Association.
Yeah.
No conflict of interest there, right? So he argues on behalf of Gordon McDonald and Chris Sununu. David Binford is a state rep from Grafton County. He argued that that under 141C, that I'm entitled to due process of law. But here's what happened. In the legal circles, it's called failure to develop an argument. If I say you violated my constitutional rights, but I don't explain why, unlike if I said you violated my First Amendment right to freedom of speech by muzzling me. Now I'm being specific as my right, and then I'm being specific about the violation. But when you don't do that, and you simply, what they did is they said, my client's entitled to due process of law under 141, and nothing else was said. Nothing else was said. So Daniel Will argues on behalf of the state, Your Honor, there's a public health crisis coming our way called COVID-19, but we're not going to talk about. Remember, the governor is responsible for the faithful execution of the existing laws. He ignored 21P53 that said that, see, the first thing in the emergency declaration says that he has to enforce the existing laws. But they didn't. They lied. They had a duty not to do this, and they did. So they looked the other way and they said, Your Honor, the governor doesn't derive his powers under 141C, the public health chapter, he's deriving his powers under a declared state of emergency. And he got this corrupt judge to go along with him. And then the plaintiffs didn't appeal to the Supreme Court. That was used as case precedent, and then all the challenges that followed all failed. They cited that case as precedent. That's how this corrupt system works. So I'm not surprised, but I'll guarantee you that the Exeter case isn't based on what I presented today, knowing, in other words, undermine the very substance of any authority they have. They didn't go there. They're arguing tit for tat about whether a mask is appropriate medical treatment. So the judge, remember, the judge is supposed to have a blindfold on. Scales. If the evidence on the scale, right, he can't use his own knowledge of the law to act on behalf of counsel for either side. This is a problem. Not that it's inappropriate for the judge to act that way. The problem is that the fact that the state isn't doing its job. You have a corrupt governor and a corrupt attorney general and a corrupt legal counsel all conspiring to deprive us of our rights. And they got a judge to go along with it. And this isn't the first time. This stuff has been going on a long time.
So question, we know sheriffs have the most jurisdiction other than military.
Right.
In a situation like this.
Yes.
So if we reach out to our county sheriffs and invite them to the school board with affidavits.
The key is, this education has to happen with your sheriff. I'm going to volunteer to do that with any sheriff that we can meet with. I called one already, I'll get to you in a second. I called one already to meet with him privately and say, look, because when you put this to them, the first thing they're going to ask you to do is, what law are they violating? What law are they violating? Point me where I can work for you. Because what the state's doing is they've got a lawyer who's working on their behalf to act in a corrupt manner, not in an honorable way, to force a political agenda, right?
Right.
And so that's what we're fighting. But when you go to the sheriff, you're right. That's exactly what needs to happen. That's what I'm proposed that we do here, is fire one board, get them real good, and take them down. Simply file, because no one's taken the school board under these terms. Violation of their oath of office.
So let's pick one and take them down.
Exactly.
Well, here's the thing, with masks,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Exeter.
with masks,
Yeah.
there
They're
is,
listed now.
there is facts out there that breathing in toxins
Right.
that were designed by our creator to exit,
Right.
we are causing pneumonia, bacterial infection, MRSA. So right there alone is abuse to any humanity.
I agree.
And we need to step up,
That's what we need.
sheriff number one.
Right.
Yeah.
We gotta get the authority with us, beside us, not against us.
And back to bad case law, back to the fact that Jacobson versus Massachusetts has been habitually recited, which says that the state government can in fact, for the good of the people, do things for your benefit, that they, the clowns, get to decide for your benefit what is good for you and what is not good for you. And this Constitution says they can't do that.
Right, so if we
Actually-
go to power, go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead.
You know, it's the only thing that DHHS has, so if you do a 91A to DHHS, the only thing that they have about like this virus and stuff like that is one study, and this kind of goes for what you had said, gentleman in the back that's in Alton. So they have a study about masks, so if that's what we're talking about right now with masks. Remember the last year at this time when they did all that stuff, it was all in uproar about the hockey, all these hockey parents, and they were making the kids wear masks.
Yeah.
So DHH has a study, and it started in, I think, August, and it ended in November. And so when they put the mask mandate in on these hockey kids, infections went through the roof,
Amen, it does.
right?
Dr.
So-
Judy Mikovich
And
told us
that's all
this
they
would
have,
happen.
DHS is all they have, and so it proves, like, there was no issue
Right.
with positive cases with hockey kids before they put a mask mandate in.
Right, and you have false negative tests.
Correct.
The PCR test, the mask, the vaccine are all driven to do one thing. To spread infection,
Yes.
to spread fear, okay? To cause as much chaos as possible, because that isn't the real plan.
That's right.
The real plan is to microchip everyone and to collapse the global currency into one digital currency with a social credit score that you can't get your goods and services unless you're a good little Johnny and you do what the government tells you. That's the real agenda. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go to her because
I
she,
just wanted to let you know that I did speak to Rockingham County. They don't want, at least at that time, the sheriff did not want to get involved.
Messias, yes, I spoke with him as well.
And so, you know, I don't know if he just doesn't know. what
He
it
doesn't.
is.
No,
He
I'll
doesn't.
tell you what, you wanna know about him?
Well, he's
So
buddy,
he's
Sununu's
in on it.
buddy too.
Yeah, so
Sold you out.
Macias has come out publicly, we have him in writing saying that he will not go against the governor. The governor is who got him elected, that's his buddy. So that's what it comes to.
Pay to play.
Exactly, so Sununu grew up and went to school in Salem, that's his stomping grounds, he got him elected. He has this allegiance to a
He needs to be
governor and not
removed.
to the people, he
Yeah.
needs to be
Right, the
removed.
sheriff needs to be, and remember,
Right, yes.
these sheriffs, the only thing they know about the Constitution, it is that they are elected by it. That's all they know. They don't even know what the document says. They're no smarter than the others. Why? Because there's not the necessity for them to know what it says. They have no incentive. They are incentivized and paid to enforce the statute law, no matter whether it's right or wrong. Hang on. You next.
So can we not do anything with this until?
That is a draft and a template.
Okay.
We'll figure out a better way to disperse it. Make it be your own, but it was a template for you to understand and start, because folks, this is a long haul. So this is why I wanted to lay the foundation for you tonight, so that you'll be armed with the fundamentals to continue your education. And, you know, I'm gonna continue doing this, but from that basis moving forward, that template would be a process. Now, that is a resignation letter. If it was me, I'd just serve it on him and say, you're done, get out of here. And I would love to arm the sheriff, show up, educate the sheriff, and say, Sheriff, I'm going to notice them, and if anyone else gets stupid, remove them because they committed fraud. But you have to show them what the law is, because that's what the prosecutor does. And if you don't know it, and you say, but I'm an upset parent, you've got to protect me, they're going to say, bye-bye. Because they're not smart enough, and they're not going to hang their hat out there. It's up to us to fight for ourselves.
Do we have one sheriff that will?
No,
You have a deputy, I wanted to say, there's a deputy.
that's who I reached out to.
So his name's Basha?
Yes.
Yeah, huh? Basha. And he's a pretty decent guy.
Yeah.
Because he's deputy. But, I mean, he's also not gonna be able to go against his boss.
No, but he might be able to replace him.
Go
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna mention him, I think he's definitely somebody who.
I invited him here tonight.
Okay.
Well, he didn't get back to me, and I didn't get his contact info until earlier today. Sorry for bad planning on my part, I just got a lot on my plate. But yeah, that's what I want to do, is to start doing these.
Two quick things though, I think he would be an excellent ally for this effort. My husband and his nephew, our nephew, met with him a couple weeks ago to talk about this very thing, to talk about our two-way rights, and talk about, you know, some of the things that are coming down the pike. And he was 100% on the side of the people. So I definitely think you should,
He was only one of 2 deputies who showed up out of the entire state for the Sheriff Mack
And
event.
he met with my husband for, well, about 2 hours. 2 hours. And the
Yeah.
other thing I wanted to say real quickly is this gentleman, where he's already started the process, is it possible to, you know, use that district? I know we all have these districts we gotta work with, but
Right.
does it make sense to work with this district and see it all the way through so that everyone can follow that process?
It'll fall in.
Do you know what I'm saying?
And I have a suggestion also, along with the sheriff. We are a team, we're all one team.
Yep.
Okay? Put your someone bold, comfortable, and knowing, proof of the pudding is your arm.
Right,
You gotta have facts.
right.
And when you take that facts and you boldly stand up peacefully and patriotically and address that to the board,
100%.
and you have your sheriff beside you, okay, working for you, because you are their boss, then we may get something.
Right.
But we have to get to that point
Right.
first. We have to. Sheriffs and
Yeah.
a good solid voice representing the team that's there with them. Because I don't have children in school. I have grandbabies,
Yeah.
6 of them, that are gonna be going to these public schools.
Right.
I I went to the National School Board, I stood up, spoke my piece peacefully, patriotically,
Yep.
got a wink
Right.
from the police
Right.
there,
Right.
because they're all under oath. And I let everybody know,
Right.
when they're under oath, and they're looking at treason.
Right, right.
Proof of the pudding, and when they get that put in their head, they start thinking twice.
Yeah.
Because a military tribunal is not going to the district court, is not going to the Superior Court. It is going to a JAG case, a JAG military, whatever you want to call it, not terminology. So your sheriff and a solid, like Kelly's got a great voice, she's a great representation, I'm just using your example.
I can't take on anything
Okay.
else.
I'm just using you as an example. So when you do go in, you have the voice, have your team with you, supporting you, but bring the sheriff that's on your side.
But do the preemptive work in front, which is what I'm advocating now.
I've had several police officers give me the wink too.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
thank me outside. the
Yeah,
building.
you too.
And they're only waiting for you guys to have enough knowledge yourselves.
Yeah, a lot of.
Once they know that you know what the law is,
Get into it.
They'll
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
you.
Right, and I.
Out of all the districts in the state, the one to do is SAU 16. Out of all the districts in the state, and the only reason why is because there's 4 lawsuits that are going right now. And if you look at all of the communication that's come out from Frank Edelblu and the AG's office, we'll send, everybody give me your email, I'll send you the article. It basically talks about the prom gate, the flag gate, all of the stuff that happened. And, you know, although they got reprimanded, it literally says in there that they can't do anything.
Right.
So, and basically putting it back on the people to then have to go get a lawyer and then fight this. I mean, so even though you're supposed to go through the process and report any of these discrimination, you know, forced, like, for example, the problem with that document that came out, even though it came out from the attorney in the DOE, it needed
which
to
is
have...
what you were alluding to.
Yeah, it needed to have the step before it.
Right.
So it was focused on the vaccine piece, right? Because that's the legislative piece. But it needed to say you can't discriminate just in general with
Right.
someone that is not wearing one or not. And that's where the piece was. Just so you know, that document, and this is where Kim and I really know this really well, every single one of these school boards, I've gotten into fights on the phone with Edelblu, like screaming at him. And so every single one of these school boards were served that. So they're in all violation of it, and they don't care.
Right,
They don't care.
No, they don't.
right.
And then Edelblu says, okay, well, we gave them a slap and said that they can't do it anymore, but he's not using his level of authority to do anything else. And then it's going back on the parents.
That's actually
Because he doesn't know.
Poppy seeds.
Thank you.
I'm
Go
on
ahead.
tape now saying that.
So my question is, you pointed out the people, we the people several times.
Yep.
And I guess the real question I have is, you know, we have voters, we have transplants like me, right? Not a state citizen by affidavit anyway. Who are we the people? Like, is there anyone excluded from that group? Do we have to be careful about our status? And
Right now, no, only because once you understand that the current establishment, as it exists now, is all a franchise of the federal government. That's why there's a statutory state within the state. I pointed this out several years ago, people thought I was crazy, and now that I've proven my case right, which is that when they started bribing and controlling the states with federal money and continuing year after year after year of growing the size of our state government, they had to make it represent who was financing it. So they created, see, there's a difference between the state as defined by the Constitution. That's the preamble, Part 2, form of government, tells you what the state is. It's a body politic made up of the people. The statutory definition of state, with a lowercase s, is the federal government. It says so. It says that whenever the state is spelled with a lowercase s, it means it's the federal government.
That's right.
So they come right out and tell you, you have more than 10,000 statutes. This fight is even bigger than just what's going on with the schools right now. This goes to the very heart of our survival. And that's why I laid out my presentation tonight, to give you the fundamental basics so that we can grow from here. Because what happened here tonight needs to start happening in every community in the state, and then we take our state back, because that's the only way to do it peacefully.
Amen.
Only with knowledge. I'm sorry, Donna, and then I'll go to you, and then I'll go to you.
Very quickly, I wanted to give everyone a little bit of good news. This hit Twitter about 3 hours ago. The source was a national expert on school choice named Corey DeAngelis. Breaking news, New Hampshire School Boards Association just decided to withdraw from the National School Boards Association effective immediately.
Really?
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait.
So it's a result of the pushback against DOJ investigation against parents who are threatening their schools.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, look, they
Yeah,
plan
so-
on running another, the GOP plans on running another BS election.
Oh,
They
yeah.
extended those absentee provisions for COVID. Your boss won't let you off work. Your babysitter won't show up for your child or dependent care. National Weather Service says they're gonna issue a weather warning and blah, blah, blah. No, there are only 2 reasons you can vote absentee, and they're granting by statute resident aliens who are not citizens of the state or qualified voters and inhabitants. By statute, they're granting these college kids the right to vote, show up here on the same day. They wanna do that again.
So Donna, that actually came, Frank Edelblue was behind that, so he, not publicly, but he basically was telling people, pound that, I don't know if you saw it on the social media channels, saying, call that number to
Anne-Marie Banfield
demand.
put it out there.
Exactly,
Yeah.
to have people to come out, so he was really behind that.
I would say keep going, only because they came out against Out of Blue and on New Hampshire Public Radio.
Exactly,
And they basically told, on New Hampshire Public Radio website,
that's right.
Article 8, right? They basically said they don't understand Article 8 because Frank Edelblue came out and spoke directly to parents about this masking issue.
That's right.
He was doing his
And
job.
the New Hampshire School Board Association came out and said he did it wrong, he should have gone through the superintendents, he's
Correct.
creating a problem.
So let's hope
So-
that this news, that Sununu stays silent or goes on another attack against Edelblue. Because that will further push him into the corner that we need him to be pushed into.
Yep.
So that'll be good for him to just stay quiet about it, because Edelblue's gonna definitely come out and.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, right now we have Karen Testerman, who I love and fully endorse. She's already declared her candidacy. The likely 3 additional who will join the race, these are my predictions. We'll see, unfortunately, Kelly Ayotte. We'll unfortunately see Chuck Morse and maybe Frank Edelblue, who maybe didn't lose the first time when he ran against Sununu. Okay, so when I saw Sununu go after him, I immediately said something's up. Something's up. Either Sununu thinks he's going to run, and he's trying to undermine him again because he's already done it once by offering him, right? That was the deal. You step down, I'll take the governor's office and I'll give you a sweetheart job at DOE. Okay, so, but those are the 4 likely. I predict that we'll see that as a governor on the conservative side, on the red side of things. The Democrats will put up their typical list of idiots.
I heard word about Jody too, Jody representative that just went through the vote last week. I heard her husband might be running.